It's freezing here.
Good evening and welcome everybody to our Committee of the Whole for July 25th. I am sitting in as chair. I want to go ahead and call to order our meeting. And first up, we have a discussion, the first of our summer school program. Nate, please take it away.
Better, Kevin? Come on, buddy. There we go. He reminded me to speak directly into the microphone. He was very upset with me earlier when I wasn't talking heartily into this. So good evening, everybody, and welcome to the first of the 17-part series on economic development here in the city of Gahanna, or 6. Relax, Councilman, it's fine.
It's going to be that kind of night, isn't it?
I'm here to bring the humor and a little bit of levity to a normally dry topic. And to the citizens who are here, I apologize in advance. Tonight's agenda, economic development, back to basics. So what is economic development? The tools in the toolbox, incentives, special entities, and miscellaneous items. I had sent some readings to the council beforehand, so hopefully you had a chance to take a look at that a little bit. If not, we're going to go through a real high level and then hopefully open up some Q&A.
Was that 328? Was that the 328s that we had to read?
Yes.
Oh, okay, thank you.
I gave you a ton of readings.
Yeah, you did.
I always like to lead off economic development conversations with this slide. It is, what is economic development? And so what my friends think I do is I travel the world recruiting businesses to come to my community. What my family thinks I do is not much. What the public thinks I do is oftentimes talk about incentives, which we'll actually be talking about this evening a little bit. What elected officials think I do is just do groundbreakings. What I think I do is make a difference in my community, and what I actually do is lose my mind. And so there's a lot of nuance in a lot of this work that we do here. A lot of the time it is around economic programming, incentivization, the financials, but in the reality, what we're trying to do is strengthen our tax base, create opportunities for our residents to live, work, and invest in our communities, and by doing so, build better cities, build better infrastructure, build better schools. But I always like to use a little levity here with this slide as to what I actually do. I know the mayor does not like this slide whatsoever. A little bit in the tools in the toolbox. So to begin with, last year we had a couple programs come through, a couple projects, specifically Mill Street and ADB Safegate, and as part of that council's makeup, there's a lot of questions around tax abatement, so I thought I'd easily start off with, what the heck is one? Give the 101s. In Ohio, there's 2 types of tax abatement incentivizations. There's a community reinvestment area, or CRA, and enterprise zone. That enterprise zone is actually exclusive to county level governments only. Enterprise zones are historically in unincorporated areas, so think townships within county governments. There are a few enterprise zones within municipal areas, but those enterprise zones have historically been previously unincorporated areas that were then incorporated. So that enterprise zone program doesn't go away. For purposes of the Gahanna, we are CRA exclusive. We have 5 CRA areas. We'll go through each one of them this evening a little bit. The real key distinction between our CRAs are what's called pre and post 1994. What does that mean? Well, on July 1st of 1994, the Ohio Revised Code was changed by the state legislature. And that basically said that if you were an incorporated community reinvestment area made prior to July 1st of 1994, so June 30 or earlier of 1994, you were considered pre. That means that under the prior laws of the program from the Ohio Revised Code, or ORC, you were fully entitled to those incentivizations. There was no negotiations with your local councils, school districts, you name it. It was considered a baseline entitlement, just like zoning or anything else. Everything after July 1st of 1994 is called a post-1994 CRA. That means everything's on the table from a negotiation standpoint. You'll see in the slide deck here a little bit, there's been some adjustments to Gahanna's over the years. And ultimately, the city, even in its pre-94 CRA status, had, not necessarily has, but had the authority to adjust it to meet the needs of the community. And we'll talk a little about what that means as well as we go through the different districts. But that's really the distinction. And I want to make sure we all understood that a little bit, that pre and post 94, because that's real critical as it relates to this specific program. This outlines a lot of what that means. So this table is actually from the ODOD website, Ohio Department of Development. In the pre-94, it was all determined on what your authorizing resolution did. So, for example, let's say the CRA number 5, Councilman, which is our pre-94, it lists what can and cannot be utilized in that originally authorizing legislation. You can go up to 10 years on the residential remodels, up to 12 years on multi-unit remods. Residential new construction was up to 15. Commercial industrial was up to 12 remodels, and then new construction was 15. What does that mean? It means that as a pre-94, you can go up to those values, but those values were initially established by the council. So the state government basically allowed cities and villages to police their own levels, if I may. You can choose what you want to do in that pre-94 status. In the post-July 1 status, these are all negotiated. So these are things that then the council, school districts, and those are typically the two big voting parties, right? So oftentimes you'll see, if we did not have a funding agreement with the schools, whenever we had a CRA application come into the city of Gahanna right now for our post-94 CRAs, we would have members of council and the schools negotiate that, bring those receiving applications back to this body as a whole, and then act on it independently, hoping that we would coalesce some level of agreement through that process. Because of our current agreement with the schools, everything's approved pending this body's approval. They waive their right to it, but then they want fully compensated for it. And we'll talk a little bit about that later in the slide deck. So what do we have? So these are some of the zones that we currently have. CRA number 1 is a post-1994 CRA. It actually dates back to the early 80s, but it's been amended multiple times. So that was the one thing I did not mention on the prior slide. When you have a pre versus post, if the public body that governs that CRA amends it 3 times, expands it, adjusts the values, anything of that nature, it reverts to that post-94 status. So you get what's called 2 bites at the apple. If you want to expand the territory, if you want to adjust the values that are eligible within the CRA, you can do so. But the minute you do it a 3rd time, now it's a post-94 CRA, and so the values drop considerably. So in this situation, a CRA number 1, post-94, you see the values there. I should also note that in post-94 CRAs, you start at 50% under the Ohio Revised Code. So the baseline for this is a 10-year 50% abatement on improved values within the dwelling 2 units, commercial industrial remods, and the commercial industrial space. Everything above that is a negotiation between the schools, the city in this instance, and the developer or end business owner. Now, does that make sense? CRA number 2, I call this the Grody CRA. This is actually exclusively around the Donato's property at Taylor Station Road. And so these include the Donato's headquarters facilities, the Grody manufacturing facility, and their R&D facility. This is a pre-94 CRA, so it's a current baseline. It's only for industrial uses. So although the council, when it originally formed this CRA, allowed for dwelling remods and commercial industrial housing remodels, just like any other traditional CRA, in reality, all you have there is commercial and industrial uses. And so it's that last one that matters in this instance. So it's a 15-year, 100% on the improved values tied to those improvements there near and around the corner of the Taylor Station Road area. CRA number 3, this is a post-1994 CRA. This is essentially Central Park, so the former brownfield site where we have a lot of that industrial development going around it now. It's been reclaimed. It's now the Golf Depot, with the golf course on top and the driving range. That's all part of this project here. We have those number of different out parcels that go around Tech Center Drive and Science Boulevard. That's all inclusive here. Again, predominantly this area is industrial commercial, and so you see a lot more in that 15-year, 100% on the improved values for new construction, but certainly some of the commercial industrial remods of up to 12 and up to 100%. Again, this is a post, so when we have applications, so my presumption, Mayor, and I wasn't here just yet for this, when the folks from Edison Brewing and the Peak at Edison came in a few years ago for their incentivization, that was a negotiation, for example. That was a project that was in this area that they negotiated those values with to create jobs in that office building as well as the brewery next door. CRA number 4, this is a pre-94 CRA. This is one that I think this council and body is most familiar with. This is where the Crescent is. So this is the office center area. So think lower part of Central Park. There's 2 different CRAs there. The lower part is where the office buildings are. This is where the former Zulily building was. This is where the AEP corporate office is, as well as where I mentioned earlier the Crescent project is on the western side of this CRA. My earlier point about how the council can decide how things are adjusted in pre-94s. In this instance, the council did 2 things. The first thing that the council did after it created this CRA back in the late 80s was expand it. So you actually, the first bite of the apple was the expansion of it to include portions of where Buckles Court and the expansion of Tech Center Drive is currently located closer to the airport. The second bite at the apple was actually the reduction of value. So originally this CRA was set up to be a 15-year, 100% abatement, and the council adjusted those values to what is currently the 10-year, 80% maximum value on it. That counts as an adjustment or a revision to the CRA. If someone were to make another amendment to the CRA, it would become a post-94 CRA. So my suggestion as a professional in this capacity, given the level of development that's happening over there, I would not amend it. Those are values that are kind of pro forma'd into what's happening in that area. It could have a detrimental effect long-term to what's happening over in that portion of the city. And finally, CRA number 5. This is essentially it's called in the box West Side, but it's really from the farthest terminus on Granville Street is essentially the library property, if you can, you know where the library is, going west through Creekside and Old Gahanna, and then into the west side areas along West Johnstown Road, Stiegler, Agler areas, etc. You see the values there again, dwelling and remodels, commercial industrial housing remodels, and then the new construction activities. We just actually had one of these come through, the Ohio HD, and their work over there on the west side went through a pre-94 application with my office for approved for a 10-year or 12-year 100% abatement on the improved values that they did over there. They actually invested over $1 million into their facility to modernize their building during COVID, and they just applied it for the most recent round of property tax inclusions. It did not require us city council action as it's a pre-94. The posts are what come forward to you, but that was one that just came through as part of our process here in our department.
Can I ask what building that was?
Yes, ma'am.
What business that was?
Ohio HD, they're the mayor. Actually, you may know what they do
Are
more
they on
effectively.
Agler Road? No?
They're in the former Wonder Bread building.
Okay, gotcha.
And they did a multi-tenant expansion there, so they fitted out some new office building for additional tenants, but they also certainly invested money into their space as well. Any other questions before I move on? I think this is the last slide on CRAs. It is. The other principal program that we have here in the city of Gahanna is TIFs, tax increment financing. What I tend to think about with this, especially if you haven't worked on TIFs or aren't have a high familiarity with TIFs, is, you know, how does it work, what's eligible, and for how long as it is? Well, quite candidly, this chart is the best thing there is for a TIF. I'm going to break this down in the most simplistic fashion I can. Anytime something is TIFed, your base value is set at that year 1. And those taxes attributed to that year 1 value will be paid every year to those various taxing bodies for the next 30 years. period. Any improvements, any incremental value change from that year one is then captured and diverted into the TIF fund. Now, we've talked a little bit about here at this body and some other meetings about what a non-school TIF is. A non-school TIF is just that. It sets the year one value for everything but school value. So then schools continue to get paid as incremental value increases on property, but the other non-school related values, so city taxes, any county related taxes, other levies that may be on that property, are still diverted into the TIF fund. That is captured and utilized to pay off eligible expenses related to the TIF ordinance. Here's the fun part of that statement. Who sets the TIF ordinance? You set the TIF ordinance. As a governing body, City Council has exclusivity in determining what is eligible and ineligible for TIF legislation. In our TIFs, predominantly it's infrastructure, but we have a number of TIFs that also include language around public service facilities, public safety facilities, and then specifically articulate intersection improvements. It can get very detailed or stay very broad. But the City Council is who sets the authorizations as to what is and is not eligible for TIF inclusion. Those values are redirected for 30 years, and at the end of that 30-year period, that TIF fund for that project or that property is dissolved, and then the new taxes on year 31 are dispersed as if they would normally have been the entire time. Does that make sense? I mean, that's about as nitty-gritty as it gets with TIF, and it's one of the most powerful tools that we have from a public financing standpoint, because TIF funds everything. So I always like using this picture of the bachelor, because the most eligible thing we have is infrastructure. Don't laugh, Councilman Runner. You know it's funny.
That's a stretch, Nate.
It is.
That's a stretch.
It is the most eligible bachelor in Gahanna. Infrastructure improvements. Storm sewers, water lines, sanitary trails, creek improvements, all of these things are eligible under TIF. And so as we continue to expand our tax bases and capture TIF funds, it's important that we continue to evaluate where the city's growing and what the city's needs are, because TIF is one of the best tools that we have, not only to plan for the future, but implement current projects. And as always, when in doubt, check your authorizing ordinance for a listing of eligible expenses. Director Ballmer is somewhere behind me taking a note because I owe her an email about eligible expenses related to facilities and TIF. Don't I? But always check your authorizing legislation. The other tool that we have that's exclusively Gahanna's to manage and operate is our office and industrial incentive, or income tax. Under our statute, and we'll talk actually a little bit about this tonight, as I have an ordinance before this body to review, we allow for some level of rebate or refund or whatever term you wish to use in this space to be considered for new business expansions. Now, under our city guidelines, that program cannot be commingled with other incentivization programs. So you can't mix a CRA with an O&I, for example. That's excluded as part of the guidelines. But we do allow for that level of consideration when trying to attract a new business. The example I provided here was someone who's going to give a $10 million anticipated payroll at 2.5% income tax. The city would give a 25% rebate over a 5-year term. The overall value would be somewhere in the neighborhood of $1.25 million. The city would receive $937,500, and the company would receive $312,000 over that term. Real simple. We'll actually go fairly deep into this a little later this evening over a project that we have up for considerations tonight. But this is another one of those tools that we have available here in the city of Gahanna. Councilman Weaver, you have this look of many questions.
No, I'm good for right now.
Okay.
You have him mesmerized.
I doubt that. This is what he looks like when he's sleeping with his eyes open. It's fine. Other things that you should be known about with economic development, and this has actually come up previously in this room. Special units of government, community improvement corporations, what are they? We've talked a little bit about this at the most recent joint meeting of CIC and City Council. Mr. Hicks is here from the CIC. I believe he's here as his Planning Commission capacity this evening. But he's also on my board, as are Mr. Weaver and Mr. Renner and Mayor Jadwin and no one else in this room. Just want to make sure I didn't have to make any more call-outs. The goal of a CIC is to help aid in economic development activities within your city. It's also defined by the resolution. So a city government or county government. So I come from before joining the city of Gahanna, I worked for a county that authorized the CIC to do a number of activities on its behalf. Here in Gahanna, you exclusively give some leeway in the economic development assistance of opportunities and activities, as well as land disposal. Essentially, the CIC is serving as your land bank here locally. But there are a number of different resources that if the city of Gahanna woke up tomorrow and said, you know what, we don't want Nate Strum to be a city employee, we want to be an employee of the CIC, you could empower the CIC, dissolve my department. I'm not suggesting this by any means. Please do not dissolve my department.
It's like, where are you going with this?
I'm giving you an example, but I don't like where it's going. This is one of those free thought moments where like, I wish to back up about 5 minutes ago. But things that you can think about as it relates to CIC, but predominantly here in Gahanna, we're utilizing it as a land banking capacity. NCA, so this came up as part of the Crescent Project, and NCA is another special union of government which has independent bonding capacity, allows for NCA charges, new community authority charges, community development charges. In short, what ends up happening here is that a public body, such as City Council, establishes the parameters of which a new community authority can be implemented. And as such, that new community authority can implement various taxes, levies, and liens within the property which it governs to govern higher levels of parks, infrastructure improvements. They're all defined as part of the petition to create that NCA. Sounds really complicated, right? Not really. Most common one in the region right now, Bridge Park. And that what you see right there is actually a sample of a receipt that you would get when you go to Bridge Park and you would purchase something. Every transaction in Bridge Park has a 0.5% tax on it. That's the NCA charge, and that's done before taxes. So you still pay a tax on a tax. It's fun. Welcome to economic development. But that pays for their infrastructure, their roads, their garages, you name it, and it's all defined within that parameter. That's what the NCA pays. Who's been to Tanger Outlets up in Delaware? That's also an NCA. You pay a 1% NCA charge on everything you buy at Tanger. And that pays for the roadway improvements in and out of the outlet mall. That pays for the road and bridge improvements over at the interchange. So that's one of the ways that this program is utilized to help offset those major costs.
Nate, is that always 0.5%?
No, it can be whatever's defined in the petition. That's a great question. It's really key, so it really depends on what the final budget is. I'm going to go back one slide. It really depends on what the petition for the creation is, the level of infrastructure investment is, and note that the new community authority does not go away. It doesn't have an expiring timeline to it. So once it's created, it's there. Actually, and I'll say this, another really great tool for NCA, the New Albany Beauty Park. That's an NCA. So they have fees baked in that are taken out of the project, even with the abatements that may be on property. There's still fees tied there, and they fund infrastructure improvements and other activities as well. A SID. This is a special improvement district. This is something actually Councilman Renner and I had a decent conversation about the other day. This is a special unit of government. This actually does have an expiring timeline on it. It cannot exceed 10 years. Those SIDs can be renewed. So that's a little bit of a misnomer. It has to include 60% of the frontage of all real estate upon a public right-of-way within a defined area, or 75% of all property located within that district. What does that mean? Essentially, 60% of people who front roads, or 75% of everybody, has to be involved in this. Once done, they can assume similar fees to an NCA. They can do taxing fees, charge fees to customers on commercial real estate activities. There can be a SID fee on the conveyance of property. I'm showing here over the Rhine. This is a SID in Cincinnati. That, their SID has specific guidelines that have a SID charge towards different activities in the district, and then it funds public parks, public art, historic renovations in their defined neighborhood. There's a board that's created. It's representative by both the city government there in Cincinnati as well as local neighborhood officials. They govern it. They administer these dollars on an annual basis, and those programs are implemented. Here locally, the most common known SID is Nationwide Arena. That's a SID. So when you look at the planters that are down by Nationwide or the special security details that are down by Nationwide, those are all paid through the SID. And then there's the ESID. So this is the Energy Special Improvement District, and we're actually already a part of this. This is a special designation under the Ohio Revised Code in which energy property owners who wish to have energy efficient improvements, say that 5 times fast, done on their property can petition to be added to the ESID. This body did that in 2020, I believe. We had a petition by one church here in Gahanna to be added to the Franklin County Columbus Finance Authority ESID program. I'm the representative on that body, so I work with Patty Huddle and Jean Carter Ryan on those ESID applications for their body now. But this is a mechanism to support PACE, Property Assessed Clean Energy Programming. I'm not going to go through the nuance of PACE. We can if you'd like to. But in short, what PACE is a new, different financing tool that allows for entities to take advantage of energy efficient improvements on their property at a low interest rate. But instead of having to pay that back as a loan traditionally, it's paid back as an assessment. So I take out $1 million loan. Normally I have a debt service of X over 25 or 30 years. But instead, I want to pay an assessed value that's paid out just like property tax. It's just added to my property tax bill on an annual basis, and that's covered that way. It conveys with ownership. So if I sell my property in 5 years, that ESID PACE can either stay with the property or be cleaned and scrubbed at the time of transaction. Just depends on what the interest of the new ownership group is. What we see a lot of times with this, churches do a lot of ESID improvements, so HVACs, window improvements, roof improvements, that all can be included as part of the ESID program. Historic structures like to do this a lot if the ROI gets really tight on their renovation costs. They'll pull this out and do a special assessment on it, especially if they're getting some level of tax abatement. So that they'll essentially the lower tax abatement liability on the assessed value from the county auditor is then balanced out with the PACE payment. Things like that. But it's a nice program. It's not widely used here in Ohio. It is widely used in a lot of other municipalities. I did a lot of these programs in Pennsylvania back in my prior life, especially around solar panels, residential solar panel installation, things of that nature. So that's this in a nutshell. That's 20 slides, and I don't know how quick that was. If you did the pre-reading, that was a really nice review for you. If you didn't do the pre-reading, it's like Spanish.
Weaver.
I knew you were going to have a question. I could see in your face 10 minutes ago.
Well, Director, first, thank you very much for the presentation, for the pre-reading. It's greatly appreciated, and I would encourage everyone, if you are having trouble sleeping, the Ohio Economic Development Manual that the director sent out and can be found on the Attorney General's office website is actually very helpful.
It's over 1,000 pages of nonsense. Read it.
A lot of very helpful information in there, and it was beneficial to reading before your presentation, so thank you. A couple of questions.
Sure.
Wonder if you can touch a bit on pilot payments and how and when they're used and the advantage to the municipality.
You're skipping ahead to session 3.
Okay, well then I'll table my question.
So I can answer that a little bit, but I actually do have a whole session about pilot payments, its arrangements, how it works, especially with residential developments and how we've used them historically with school compensation. So I have an entire session on school comp. So pilot payments, for those who do not know, I'm not talking about airline pilots being paid by the city of Gahanna. These are payments in lieu of taxes. What we end up doing here, oftentimes, we use our basic model here in the city of Gahanna, is if we have a pre-negotiated structure with our school district, the Gahanna Jefferson Public Schools, and as such, pilot payments are made annually. We make a determination as to what the loss of tax income would be to the schools based upon economic development projects that have happened here in the city of Gahanna for the past 12 months. And then we make pilot arrangements, typically through some TIF monies. Joanne, you're here. Not GF, right? Just typically TIF? That's what I thought. Most TIFs are, a lot of our older TIFs especially are overperforming, so they're able to utilize them and leverage them for these types of programs. But I have an entire session on pilots, how they work, why it matters, and why having, and it's essentially economic development and risk management. Trust me, it'll be a snooze fest.
I can't wait. May I ask another question?
Please, go ahead.
And perhaps you'll touch on this later. In terms of CRAs and, new company coming intends to add 25 jobs,
Yep.
retain 50. The readings mentioned penalties. Are those automatic for failure to meet those goals, or are those discretionary? If somebody says they're going to add 25 jobs, but they get 24, I mean, that's...
I'm trying to figure out if the guy whose day job is to work